You think I'll cry tonight? Dominic Thorne's voice echoed from across the penthouse, smooth, measured, and just sharp enough to sting, as Aisha Bennett stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, watching snowflakes swirl like tiny dancers against the city skyline, her hands folded calmly in front of her. The apartment was a winter wonderland, Christmas lights tracing the edges of the marble countertops and reflecting in the crystal chandelier, casting a warm golden glow that made the polished surfaces gleam. Outside, Manhattan stretched in a grid of twinkling lights and shadowed streets, a city alive yet distant, just like the life she had built beside him, a life that now felt like a fragile veneer. She allowed herself a slow breath, feeling the chill of the December air press against the glass as she considered the envelope he had left on the mahogany table, heavy with divorce papers and the unspoken challenge it represented. Every detail in the room seemed designed to remind her of his power, the empire he had constructed over decades of ruthless deals. Yet Aisha's gaze remained steady, her eyes tracing the faint reflection of her own silhouette in the polished floor, the subtle rise of her shoulders betraying none of the storm that stirred beneath her calm exterior. She could almost hear the quiet hum of expectation in the space, the way the room seemed to wait for her reaction, anticipating the tears he believed she would shed. Instead, she let a soft smile play across her lips, a private signal of the strength she had honed over months of silent preparation, late nights spent planning, learning, and building her own foundation away from the glittering cage of his world. Her fingers brushed against the edge of the envelope, the paper crisp, cold, a symbolic weight that she could acknowledge without surrendering to it. And with deliberate care she lifted it, her movements precise, controlled, almost ceremonial, as if each gesture were part of a script only she could write. The room held its breath with her, the faint scent of pine and vanilla mingling with the distant warmth of the city below, and Aisha felt the power of this moment, not in the papers themselves, not in the threat of loss or humiliation, but in the quiet assertion of her own will. Dominic's shadow fell across the far side of the room, broad and commanding, yet he did not advance, merely watched, waiting for the reaction he expected to break her composure, unaware that she had already made her choice, already claimed this night as her own. She set the envelope down, not as a surrender but as a statement, a gift in its stillness, offering him a truth he had not anticipated, that she could meet the storm with grace, that she could confront betrayal without losing herself, and that Christmas, with its soft lights and reflective calm, would witness not her tears but the first quiet act of her reclamation. Her smile deepened, not in triumph over him, but in recognition of her own resilience, the steady beat of her heart echoing the silent rhythm of empowerment she carried into the room, a rhythm he could not dictate, and a story he could not rewrite. The city outside glittered like 1,000 tiny lanterns, and the soft hum of traffic was distant, almost muted against the calm inside Aisha Bennett's sanctuary. She walked across the polished hardwood floors of the penthouse with deliberate steps, each one echoing lightly in the vast, decorated space, her mind methodically reviewing the night ahead. The Christmas tree in the corner cast a warm amber glow, the ornaments catching the light and scattering tiny specks across the ceiling, a gentle reminder that even in moments of tension, beauty persisted. Aisha paused near the grand window, lifting the sheer curtain to observe the snow gently falling along the streets below, the flakes moving with a quiet rhythm that mirrored her own steady heartbeat. Dominic Thorne remained across the room, his posture impeccable, his white dress shirt crisp against the tailored lines of his suit, hands loosely clasped behind his back, yet the air between them was charged with unspoken expectation. The envelope of divorce papers lay untouched on the mahogany table, a silent challenge that Aisha had already acknowledged and subtly transformed into an opportunity to assert her own power. She reached for her tablet, opening spreadsheets, emails, and schedules she had prepared weeks in advance, the screens reflecting a precise, controlled focus that had been nurtured through months of quiet planning and reflection. Her actions were methodical, her fingers gliding across the glass with a practiced fluidity, each movement a statement of composure and determination. Outside, the city continued its brisk winter pace, but inside, time seemed to bend, folding. around the two figures as they shared the space in quiet tension. The scent of pine, cinnamon, and faint vanilla lingered in the air, intertwining with the distant hum of classical music playing softly from the speakers, enhancing the warm contrast to the cold elegance of the marble and chrome around them. Aisha lifted her chin slightly, eyes catching the reflection of her red dress in the mirror near the entrance, a subtle but intentional signal of transformation, strength, and readiness. Dominic's gray eyes followed the motion, attempting to decipher her calm, yet there was nothing to read except confidence, a silent assertion that she was no longer the person he thought he could manipulate with fear or expectation. She approached the table, picked up a small decorative box she had prepared, its edges wrapped in silver ribbon, and turned toward him with a steady gaze that carried both warmth and authority. The soft light from the chandeliers highlighted the sharp planes of her face, the controlled poise in her stance, and the quiet determination that had been honed over months of silent preparation. Dominic took a measured step forward, his expression composed, yet the subtle tightening of his jaw betrayed the first signs of uncertainty. Aisha extended the box, offering it with deliberate grace, not as a plea or explanation, but as a statement, a gift that conveyed both her control and her perspective on the situation. The room seemed to hold its breath, every ornament, every flicker of candlelight, every shadow from the tree now playing a role in the unfolding moment. She watched his hand hesitate, the slight pause amplifying the tension, knowing that her patience, her preparation, and her dignity had brought them to this precise intersection of possibility. There was no need for words, only the silent language of presence, intention, and the subtle power of calm authority. The snow continued to drift beyond the glass, each flake a gentle witness to the calculated elegance of her actions, and as Dominic finally reached for the box, the faintest crack of a smile appeared at the corners of his lips, an acknowledgement that the balance had shifted, that the evening was no longer defined by his expectations, but by her deliberate, quiet command of the moment, a harmonious blend of grace, empowerment, and anticipation for the unfolding consequences that neither could yet fully predict. The soft glow of the Christmas lights reflected off the polished surfaces, casting a warm halo across the room as Aisha Bennett moved with deliberate calm, each step measured, deliberate, almost ceremonial. She placed the silver-wrapped box carefully on the center of the table, its presence quiet but commanding, a focal point in the elegant arrangement of the penthouse, which seemed to pause around her in acknowledgement. Dominic Thorne stood a few paces away, his posture impeccable, hands resting lightly at his sides, eyes fixed on her with a mixture of curiosity and something unspoken that flickered in the stormy gray depths. The faint scent of pine and fresh-baked cookies from the kitchen mingled with the crisp winter air seeping through the slightly ajar window, creating an atmosphere of warmth that contrasted the underlying tension. Aisha's gaze traveled across the room, noting the subtle details she had cultivated to her advantage. The glinting ornaments on the Christmas tree, the polished surface of the mahogany table, the carefully folded napkins beside the untouched champagne glasses. Every element was deliberate, a reflection of her quiet control and strategic patience. She stepped back slightly, allowing the soft hum of the city below to remind her of perspective, the broader canvas upon which this encounter unfolded. Dominic's expression remained measured, yet the faint tightening around his eyes betrayed an awareness that the evening was no longer guided by his expectations. Aisha reached into her coat pocket and retrieved a small card, sliding it gracefully onto the top of the box. The embossed lettering caught the chandelier light, a subtle shimmer that drew the eye. She did not speak, for words were unnecessary. The language of her presence, composed yet commanding, communicated far more than any utterance could. The city outside seemed to pause with her, the falling snowflakes drifting silently past the illuminated windows, framing the moment as if the world itself had become an audience to this silent exchange. She adjusted her stance, shoulders squared, chin lifted slightly, embodying the calm certainty that had been cultivated through months of preparation and reflection. Dominic took a careful step forward, and the subtle shift in the tension was palpable, a recognition of the power that now radiated from Aisha. Her eyes met his with an unwavering steadiness, conveying that the gift was more than a physical object. It was a manifestation of her resilience, her strategic foresight, and her refusal to be diminished by circumstance. The room, bathed in soft light, felt charged with quiet energy, a tension that was not aggressive but rather anticipatory, hinting at the unspoken understanding that the dynamics between them had irrevocably changed. Aisha allowed herself a slow, controlled exhale, the rhythm deliberate, as though she were conducting the silent orchestra of the evening, each heartbeat, each glance, each glint of light playing its part. She stepped closer to the table, fingers brushing the edges of the box lightly, not in hesitation, but in ceremonial acknowledgement of the moment, a deliberate choreography that communicated calm authority. Dominic's gaze softened slightly, a subtle recognition that he was witnessing the emergence of someone he had underestimated, someone who had transformed adversity into strength and anticipation into poised action. The silence held for a moment, not uncomfortable but charged with quiet revelation. The snow continuing to fall, the lights glimmering, and Aisha standing firmly in her own command, a measured, deliberate presence that required neither apology nor explanation, only acknowledgement of the new balance that had been established, a balance she now guided with quiet precision and unshakable resolve. The room held a delicate balance, the soft hum of the city below blending with the faint crackle of the fireplace that warmed the polished marble surfaces. Aisha Bennett moved with calm authority, her steps measured, the subtle glint of her red dress catching the golden light from the chandelier and scattering reflections across the walls, a quiet declaration of control and self-possession. Dominic Thorne remained near the doorway, his posture rigid yet composed, observing the deliberate calm of her movements with a mixture of curiosity and the first hints of uncertainty. Aisha lifted the lid of the silver box with care, revealing the meticulously arranged contents within, a series of hand-selected notes, photographs, and tokens that told a story not of anger or retaliation, but of reflection, strength, and deliberate perspective. Each item was chosen with thought, designed to guide Dominic through a realization of the depth of her resolve without a single word spoken aloud. She picked up the first card, its edges embossed and gleaming softly in the warm light, and allowed her gaze to meet his, steady and unflinching, silently inviting him to understand the message contained within. Outside, the snow continued its gentle descent, drifting past the tall windows and adding a layer of quiet serenity to the tense yet elegant atmosphere within the penthouse. Aisha moved with grace between the table and the fireplace, adjusting a small photograph, a subtle gesture that signaled both attention to detail and calm authority. Dominic's eyes tracked every movement, his expression a complex mix of admiration, hesitation, and the realization that the quiet poise she exhibited was not only unshakable but intentionally cultivated over time. Aisha allowed a slow, deliberate exhale, the rhythm of her breath mirroring the controlled cadence of her movements and the quiet power radiating from her presence. She set the card back into the box, sliding it gently to one side, and stepped back, creating space between them that was filled with unspoken understanding. The glow of the Christmas lights danced across her features, highlighting the calm strength in her amber eyes and the subtle curve of her lips that suggested both serenity and quiet triumph. Dominic took a careful step closer, his own reflection glinting faintly in the glass panels of the windows, and for the first time, the carefully constructed composure he relied upon in business felt inadequate against the measured authority of her presence. The scent of pine, mingled with the soft hint of vanilla from the holiday candles, filled the room, creating a warm, enveloping environment that contrasted with the weight of the unspoken tension. Aisha allowed her hands to rest lightly on the edge of the table, her posture perfectly balanced, projecting both openness and control, a subtle invitation for Dominic to confront the consequences of his expectations without confrontation or dramatic gesture. The snow outside seemed to respond to the stillness, falling with a quiet insistence that mirrored the steady, deliberate rhythm of the evening. And within the penthouse, the lights, the reflections, and the measured movements of Aisha created a cinematic tableau of empowerment and poise. Dominic's gaze softened, acknowledging without words the shift in the dynamics of the space, the recognition that her calm, deliberate control, and unyielding composure had set the tone for what would follow. The fireplace crackled again, sending a warm glow across the room, highlighting the deliberate, meticulous arrangement of each item, each gesture, each moment of presence that Aisha wielded with quiet mastery. She stepped back from the table, her movement graceful and deliberate, shoulders squared, eyes steady, and for a long, silent moment, the room existed. Only as the space of her authority, the reflection of her resilience, and the measured acknowledgement that the balance between them had irrevocably shifted, guided by her poise, foresight, and the deliberate calm that had become her signature presence. The soft hum of the city below had dimmed slightly as the night deepened, the twinkling lights of Manhattan appearing more intimate, almost private, through the towering windows of the penthouse. Aisha Bennett stood by the Christmas tree, its ornaments glinting like tiny stars against the rich green of the branches, the subtle glow of the warm lights reflecting off her poised figure in the red dress that had become her silent statement of authority and resilience. Dominic Thorne remained near the seating area, his posture rigid yet composed, observing her with a mixture of curiosity and restrained acknowledgement, the calm in her presence challenging the certainty he had once held over the space. She moved deliberately toward the grand dining table, her heels clicking softly against the polished hardwood floors, each step measured and precise, communicating confidence without words. The silver-wrapped box from earlier remained at the center, a visual anchor, but now her focus shifted to the other details she had meticulously arranged, a series of subtle visual cues, carefully placed holiday decorations, and notes that would guide Dominic toward the realization she intended without confrontation or overt explanation. The room seemed to hold its breath along with her. Every reflection in the glass surfaces, every flicker of candlelight, every shimmer from the ornaments amplifying the quiet tension and anticipation that hung in the air. She paused, allowing her gaze to sweep the room and settle briefly on Dominic, whose eyes met hers, searching for a sign, a crack, any hint of uncertainty in her flawless composure, yet finding only deliberate calm and controlled authority. Aisha allowed herself a subtle, steady exhale, feeling the rhythm of the moment, the pulse of quiet power that she had cultivated through months of preparation, the awareness that her actions, her movements, and even her stillness carried meaning beyond the visible. She picked up one of the small notes, its embossed surface catching the light, and laid it gently on the edge of the table, a signal without speech, an invitation for Dominic to reflect on the situation in the way she had carefully orchestrated. The faint scent of pine, cinnamon, and vanilla, mingled with the crisp winter air drifting through the slightly open window, creating an atmosphere that was at once warm and charged with significance, a juxtaposition that mirrored the dynamics between them. Each element of the room, from the sparkling lights to the polished wood, seemed to participate in the silent dialogue, reinforcing the message that the evening was no longer dictated by his expectations, but by her measured presence and deliberate action. Dominic took a cautious step closer, and Aisha adjusted her stance, shoulders squared, chin lifted, eyes steady, projecting a calm authority that radiated outward, transforming the energy in the room. The snow continued to drift lazily past the windows, the city lights shimmering against the flakes, and within the penthouse, time seemed to stretch, allowing every detail of the arrangement, every carefully considered gesture, every reflection of light to communicate the precision and intent behind her calm demeanor. She let her hands rest lightly on the table, not gripping, not pointing, simply resting with poised assurance, a silent command that the evening would unfold according to her terms, her preparation, and her foresight. Dominic's eyes softened slightly, registering the shift, the acknowledgement that he was witnessing not only her resilience, but also her quiet mastery of the situation, a mastery that did not require drama or confrontation, only deliberate, precise presence and the unshakable calm of someone who had reclaimed her power and dignity. The room seemed to pulse in harmony with her rhythm, the lights, the reflections, the scent, and the stillness all combining to create a moment that was both cinematic and intimate, charged with the quiet energy of control, awareness, and poised anticipation. Aisha allowed a subtle smile to form, a recognition of her own strength, her planning, and the deliberate assertion of her authority over the space, leaving Dominic with the undeniable understanding that the balance had shifted and the narrative of the evening would follow the course she had meticulously prepared and guided with unwavering poise. The soft glow of the Christmas lights seemed to brighten as Aisha Bennett moved toward the wide windows that framed the city below, her reflection mirrored perfectly in the glass as she adjusted the hem of her red dress with careful, deliberate movements. Each step across the polished hardwood floors echoed faintly, a measured rhythm that filled the space with quiet authority, signaling a balance of poise and intent that Dominic Thorne could not ignore. The envelope of divorce papers remained untouched on the table, a silent testament to the challenge he had set, yet the air between them had shifted, charged with the understanding that she had already taken command of the narrative. Aisha allowed herself a slow, controlled breath, feeling the warmth of the fireplace brush against her shoulders, mingling with the subtle scent of pine and vanilla that filled the room, a sensory anchor that reinforced the calm and confidence she exuded. She walked deliberately to the table, lightly touching the surface, a gesture of presence and calm, before moving toward the crystal ornaments on the tree, adjusting a single reflective bauble with graceful precision, a small act that carried the weight of intention and the deliberate marking of space. Dominic watched quietly, his hands resting lightly at his sides, observing the controlled elegance of her movements, aware that the dynamic he had anticipated had transformed into something far more subtle and commanding than he had expected. Aisha's amber eyes met his, steady and unyielding, conveying a composed power that required no words to establish its authority, the silence in the room reinforcing the weight of her presence. Outside, the snow continued to drift lazily past the windows, the city lights sparkling against the flakes, adding a quiet cinematic backdrop to the exchange, the stillness of the moment amplifying the deliberate energy she carried. She reached for the small card she had placed earlier, lifting it gently and sliding it across the polished surface toward him, a gesture that spoke volumes without a single utterance, signaling reflection, agency, and control over the unfolding situation. The flickering candlelight cast soft shadows across the room, highlighting the subtle shifts in her posture, the calm line of her shoulders, the measured cadence of her gestures, and the quiet deliberation that underscored every movement. Dominic's expression softened slightly, an acknowledgement of the careful thought, preparation, and strength that Aisha had brought to the space, the recognition that her presence alone had transformed the evening into a controlled and deliberate stage where she held the narrative. The faint hum of the city, the gentle crackle of the fireplace, and the ambient light from the decorations combined to create an atmosphere of poised tension, one that was not aggressive but filled with quiet expectation, allowing each gesture, each glance, and each movement to communicate with clarity and intent. Aisha stepped back slightly, letting the visual space between them become a channel for the power she wielded, the subtle shift in energy a testament to her calm authority and the months of preparation that had shaped her resolve. The snow outside continued its gentle fall, a quiet witness to the careful choreography of the evening, as Aisha Bennett maintained her poise, her control, and her dignity, demonstrating through deliberate action and measured presence that she had reclaimed the room, the moment, and the narrative entirely on her terms, leaving Dominic to observe, reflect, and reconcile with the subtle, undeniable shift in the balance of power. The soft glow of the Christmas tree lights reflected across the polished floors as Aisha Bennett stepped back from the table, allowing the carefully arranged contents of the silver-wrapped box to take their quiet place in the room. Each ornament, each candle, and the gentle flicker from the fireplace seemed to resonate with the deliberate calm she projected, reinforcing the aura of control and composed authority that Dominic Thorne could no longer ignore. She walked slowly toward the expansive windows, pausing to let her fingers brush lightly over the frame, the winter chill from outside brushing her hands and reminding her of the stillness and clarity of the night. The city below glimmered like a mosaic of lights, distant and grand, yet somehow intimate through the height and isolation of the penthouse, a perfect reflection of the balance she had achieved in her own life through patience and deliberate preparation. Dominic's posture remained rigid yet attentive, the subtle tension in his shoulders betraying the realization that the power dynamic in the room had irrevocably shifted, that the quiet authority Aisha radiated could not be commanded or challenged by mere expectation. She allowed herself a measured exhale, the rhythm of her breathing deliberate, syncing with the soft ambient sounds of the evening. The faint hum of traffic far below, the crackling warmth of the fireplace, and the gentle shimmer of the Christmas lights across the ornaments. Aisha adjusted a small, crystal figurine on the edge of the table, a gesture as precise as it was symbolic, a testament to her attention to detail and her control over the space. Her calm and deliberate movements a contrast to the tension Dominic felt, highlighting the transformation she had undergone from the quiet storms of earlier months into the poised and confident presence that now filled the room. Her amber eyes met his across the space, conveying not a challenge, but the quiet assurance of someone who had reclaimed both agency and dignity, someone who had translated past hurt into strength and quiet anticipation. She moved to the center of the room, allowing her stance and posture to become a deliberate anchor for the energy around them, shoulders squared, chin lifted slightly, every movement measured and controlled to convey authority without aggression. The snow outside fell in gentle layers, each flake catching the glow of the city lights and drifting past the windows like silent witnesses to the scene unfolding within, the outside world reflecting the calm clarity of purpose that Aisha carried into every gesture and glance. She picked up a final card from the table, running her fingers along its embossed surface, and placed it with care beside the box, a silent punctuation of intention and reflection, a careful message that required no words to convey the depth of her thought and preparation. Dominic shifted slightly, his gaze following each motion, aware now of the orchestration of the evening, the precision with which she had created an environment that reinforced her presence and authority, leaving him to reconcile with the deliberate shift in power and perspective that she had cultivated so meticulously. The room, bathed in golden light and the soft glow of the decorations, seemed to pulse with quiet energy, an echo of her deliberate calm, her resilience, and the control she now held over both space and circumstance. Aisha allowed herself a subtle, satisfied breath, acknowledging the completion of this careful arrangement, the deliberate assertion of her presence, and the unspoken communication that she had taken command of the evening, guiding the balance of the room and the narrative with grace, clarity, and the measured strength that defined her transformation. The evening deepened, and the gentle glow from the chandeliers reflected across the polished floors, accentuating the deliberate elegance with which Aisha Bennett moved through the penthouse. She paused near the grand windows, the city lights below forming a mosaic of gold and silver, each twinkle echoing the meticulous care she had invested in this moment. The Christmas tree nearby cast soft shadows, ornaments shimmering in the warm light, each reflection emphasizing the calm authority she exuded. Dominic Thorne stood at a measured distance, his gray eyes observing her every movement, the faint crease at the corner of his mouth hinting at the recognition of the subtle shift in the evening's energy. Aisha approached the table once more, brushing her fingers lightly across the silver-wrapped box, and then stepped back to allow the arrangement of items within to speak for itself. Each card, photograph, and token a deliberate expression of reflection, empowerment, and measured anticipation. She walked slowly to the fireplace, letting the warmth brush against her, the scent of pine and vanilla filling the room with a quiet, festive contrast to the tension that lingered. Dominic shifted his weight slightly, his gaze drawn to the calculated calm of her posture, the steady confidence that radiated from her every gesture, and the realization that the control he had once assumed was no longer his alone. Aisha lifted a small card from the table, its embossed lettering catching the light, and moved it to a more prominent position, a gesture both deliberate and symbolic, reinforcing the narrative she had quietly orchestrated. She allowed her amber eyes to meet Dominic's, conveying the depth of her preparation, the patience she had cultivated, and the quiet strength that had carried her to this point, a presence that required neither explanation nor confrontation. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the towering windows, catching the city lights as they fell, a serene backdrop that mirrored the composed poise she maintained within, each flake a silent witness to her calculated movements. She stepped toward the center of the room, adjusting her stance to project an equilibrium of grace and authority, shoulders squared, chin lifted slightly, and hands resting lightly at her sides. Every element of her presence deliberately orchestrated to command attention and respect without the need for words. The faint hum of the city, the crackling fireplace, and the shimmering lights created a harmonious atmosphere that magnified the precision of her every motion. The quiet power she carried transforming the room into a space of reflection and realization. Dominic's expression softened further, subtle acknowledgement of the quiet mastery and resilience she exhibited, a recognition that the balance of the evening had shifted irrevocably, guided by her calm authority and deliberate poise. Aisha allowed herself a slow, controlled exhale, letting the rhythm of her breath underscore the steady cadence of the moment, the measured assurance in her movements, and the subtle but undeniable assertion that she had reclaimed both presence and narrative. Every reflection, every light flicker, every carefully placed object reinforced her deliberate control, a silent language of empowerment and composure that spoke louder than any words could, leaving Dominic to absorb the quiet truth of her mastery, the elegant strength of her resolve, and the clear realization that the evening, the space, and the unfolding sequence of events were now directed entirely by her unshakable presence and strategic foresight. The warmth from the fireplace spread slowly through the room, the flickering light highlighting the smooth lines of the Christmas ornaments and the gentle curves of the polished furniture as Aisha Bennett moved with purpose, her red dress catching the golden glow in a way that commanded attention without demand. She approached the center of the room with measured steps, each footfall deliberate against the hardwood floors, projecting a calm authority that resonated through the space. Dominic Thorne remained near the seating area, his posture upright and composed, yet there was an unspoken tension in his gaze, a subtle recognition that the dynamic of the evening had shifted irrevocably. Aisha paused, letting her eyes sweep the room, observing every detail she had curated. The positioning of the silver-wrapped box, the thoughtful arrangement of the cards, the soft flicker of candlelight reflecting across crystal ornaments, all elements serving as a silent narrative of reflection, composure, and deliberate power. She moved to the table and lifted the lid of the box once more, revealing the contents in a way that felt both ceremonious and unhurried, each item carefully selected to convey thoughtfulness, presence, and strategic insight. Her fingers lingered on the first card, adjusting it slightly, a subtle gesture that communicated precision and attention to detail, signaling the depth of her contemplation without the need for words. The snow continued to drift lazily past the expansive windows, the city lights casting a gentle shimmer across the glass, adding a quiet, cinematic backdrop to the carefully orchestrated moment. Aisha allowed her amber eyes to meet Dominic's, steady and unwavering, a silent exchange that conveyed awareness, control, and the deliberate shaping of the evening's unfolding. She stepped back to allow the contents of the box and the carefully arranged scene to speak for themselves, her posture squared, shoulders lifted subtly, and chin held high, radiating confidence and measured authority. Dominic's gaze followed each motion, the subtle shift in his expression betraying the acknowledgement of the power she now held, a power that was quiet, deliberate, and undeniable. The scent of pine, cinnamon, and vanilla lingered in the air, mingling with the warmth from the fireplace, creating a sensory environment that reinforced the calm command she projected, each breath and movement harmonizing with the quiet energy of the room. Aisha moved toward the fireplace, her steps deliberate and fluid, adjusting the flames slightly to enhance the warm, golden glow, the ambient light highlighting the thoughtful placement of each ornament and decorative element, reinforcing the controlled precision of the evening's unfolding. She paused once more, taking in the room as a whole, allowing the stillness to emphasize the subtle but unmistakable shift in energy, a shift that placed her firmly at the center of authority, guiding the narrative through her presence, poise, and unwavering control. Dominic took a measured step closer, eyes locked on hers, recognizing the intentional calm and strategic foresight that she had brought to every detail, every gesture, and every silent statement within the space. The snow outside continued to fall in slow, deliberate flurries, a silent witness to the careful orchestration inside, reflecting the balance of serenity, anticipation, and calculated presence that defined the evening. Aisha allowed a controlled exhale to pass through her, the subtle movement reinforcing the rhythm of composure she maintained, the quiet assertion of influence and foresight evident in every measured motion, every deliberate glance, and every reflective surface in the room. The space seemed to breathe with her, each light flicker, shadow, and reflection underscoring the presence she had claimed, the authority she projected, and the deliberate poise that guided the balance of power and anticipation, leaving Dominic to absorb the full weight of her composed mastery and the undeniable transformation of the evening's dynamic. The city lights outside the expansive windows of the penthouse flickered like distant stars, their glow softened by the gentle fall of snow that coated the streets below in quiet serenity. Aisha Bennett stood near the center of the room, her red dress catching the ambient light from the chandeliers and reflecting it back with subtle brilliance, a visual representation of the deliberate strength she carried within. Dominic Thorne remained across the room, his posture composed, yet the tension in his expression hinted at the realization that the dynamics of the evening had irrevocably changed, that the calm authority Aisha radiated could no longer be contained or ignored. She moved with precise, fluid steps toward the silver-wrapped box, lifting its lid slowly, allowing the contents to speak their silent narrative. Carefully selected photographs, handwritten notes, and small tokens arranged to convey reflection, composure, and quiet power. Each item was intentional, every detail meticulously orchestrated to guide Dominic through a subtle awakening to the depth of her preparation, the resilience she had cultivated, and the deliberate control she now wielded. The warm glow of the fireplace mixed with the scent of pine and vanilla, creating an atmosphere of calm intensity, the contrast between warmth and the tension of anticipation highlighting the precise mastery of the moment. Aisha's amber eyes met Dominic's, unwavering, steady, communicating a presence that required neither explanation nor confrontation, a presence that had been honed through months of careful planning and quiet reflection. She stepped back slightly, allowing the room itself to frame her authority, the space around her echoing with the silent command of her poise and foresight. Snowflakes drifted gently past the towering windows, each one catching the glow of the city lights as they fell, framing the scene in a cinematic stillness that emphasized the quiet gravity of the encounter. Aisha placed a card carefully on the edge of the box, adjusting it so that its embossed lettering caught the chandelier light, a subtle gesture that communicated precision and deliberation, an unspoken declaration that the evening's narrative had shifted entirely under her guidance. Dominic's gaze followed her movements, the faintest crease appearing at the corner of his mouth, a silent acknowledgement of the shift in power, the realization that her calm, controlled, and deliberate presence had become the defining force within the room. She moved gracefully to a point near the fireplace, letting the warmth brush across her shoulders, and for a moment allowed herself to observe the room in its entirety. The polished hardwood floors, the glinting ornaments, the soft flicker of candlelight, and the gentle shimmer of the Christmas tree lights, all elements amplifying the precise orchestration of her influence. The hum of the city below, the crackling of the fire, and the faint scent of holiday pine combined to create a setting in which every subtle gesture and deliberate motion resonated with clarity and intent. Aisha adjusted, her stance slightly, shoulders squared, chin lifted, hands resting lightly at her sides, projecting calm authority while allowing the careful arrangement of the room and the contents of the box to communicate their message without a single word spoken. Dominic took a measured step forward, and Aisha allowed the space between them to serve as a channel for unspoken understanding, her movements, gaze, and posture conveying strength, poise, and the quiet assertion of control. The snow continued to drift silently beyond the windows, a serene witness to the deliberate choreography of the evening, each flake reflecting the ambient city lights, and within the penthouse, every element. The reflections, the flickers of light, the thoughtful placement of each item, reinforced the transformation of the space into one guided entirely by her presence, authority, and unwavering composure. Aisha allowed a controlled exhale, her rhythm steady, deliberate, and reflective of the quiet mastery she maintained, leaving Dominic to absorb the full weight of her deliberate authority and the subtle but undeniable shift in the balance of power that defined the evening. The warmth from the fireplace cast a golden hue across the polished hardwood floors, highlighting the subtle glimmer of ornaments on the Christmas tree as Aisha Bennett stood near the center of the room, her posture composed, shoulders squared, and eyes steady with quiet authority. Dominic Thorne remained at a measured distance, his gaze fixed on her, the storm of curiosity, admiration, and restrained respect evident in the subtle tightening around his eyes. Aisha stepped gracefully toward the silver-wrapped box, lifting its lid once more with deliberate care, revealing the curated contents arranged with meticulous attention to detail. Handwritten notes, photographs, and small tokens that conveyed reflection, patience, and the quiet power she had cultivated. Each item was intentionally placed, each gesture deliberate, a visual narrative of resilience and mastery that required no spoken word to communicate its weight. The snow continued its gentle descent beyond the towering windows, reflecting the city lights in delicate, fleeting patterns, a serene counterpoint to the charged atmosphere inside the penthouse. Aisha allowed herself a slow, controlled breath, letting the rhythm of the evening synchronize with the deliberate cadence of her movements, the ambient glow of the chandeliers and fireplace accentuating her calm, poised presence. She moved toward the fireplace, letting the warmth brush against her, and adjusted a small card on the table, its embossed lettering catching the light to reveal a message of subtle insight and reflection, a token of deliberate thought and empowerment. Dominic stepped slightly closer, his posture still composed, yet the recognition of the shift in control was evident, the acknowledgement of her quiet mastery resonating in the steady gaze he held on her. Aisha's amber eyes met his, unwavering and reflective, conveying a calm authority, a presence shaped by months of careful preparation, deliberate patience, and the assertion of self-possession. She stepped back, creating space between them that allowed the careful arrangement of the room, the contents of the box, and the ambient lighting to communicate their story, each element reinforcing the deliberate transformation of the energy in the room. The soft scent of pine and vanilla lingered, blending with the warmth from the fireplace and the subtle hum of the city below, creating a sensory tapestry that emphasized the deliberate, controlled environment she had cultivated. Aisha adjusted her stance, hands resting lightly at her sides, the poise in her posture reinforcing the balance she had established, a quiet equilibrium that highlighted both her resilience and her calculated mastery of the moment. Dominic observed silently, taking in the precision and control she displayed, the subtle shifts in light and reflection echoing her calm authority and leaving him to recognize the deliberate transformation of the space into a testament of her strategic composure. The snowflakes continued to drift gently past the windows, each one catching the city lights, a quiet witness to the orchestration inside, reflecting the controlled cadence, poise, and empowerment she projected. Aisha allowed a slow, deliberate exhale, the subtle motion reinforcing her measured presence, the quiet command of her energy, and the unwavering assertion that she had reclaimed not only the room but the narrative of the evening itself, leaving Dominic to absorb the full significance of the shift, the undeniable strength of her composed mastery, and the quiet, resolute authority she now wielded with effortless grace and precision. The room seemed to exhale along with Aisha Bennett as she stepped back from the table, the soft glow of the chandeliers and the flickering light from the fireplace casting golden highlights across the polished surfaces and the deep red of her dress. She allowed her amber eyes to sweep over the carefully arranged contents of the box one final time, noting how each photograph, each handwritten note, each carefully selected token reflected months of deliberate preparation, reflection, and personal growth. The soft scent of pine, vanilla, and subtle holiday spices mingled with the warmth from the fireplace, creating an environment of calm intensity that reinforced the quiet authority she projected. Dominic Thorne stood a few feet away, his posture composed, but there was a shift in the tension of his stance, a subtle recognition that the balance of the evening, and perhaps their relationship, had changed irrevocably. Aisha adjusted a card slightly, its embossed lettering catching the warm light, a subtle gesture that conveyed intention, mindfulness, and the deliberate assertion of her own narrative, leaving Dominic to observe and reflect rather than act. The snow outside continued to drift softly past the towering windows, each flake catching the city lights and adding to the serene, almost cinematic atmosphere that enveloped the penthouse. She allowed herself a controlled, deep breath, steadying the rhythm of her presence, and then moved toward the center of the room, letting the space around her reinforce the deliberate calm, poise, and mastery she now wielded. Dominic's gaze followed her movements, his expression softening with a dawning understanding that her composed authority and careful orchestration of the evening had shifted the power in ways he could not immediately counter. Aisha's steps were slow and deliberate, her posture squared, shoulders relaxed yet commanding, and her head held high, signaling both openness and unyielding self-possession. She allowed the warmth of the fire and the glow of the holiday lights to frame her presence, each element of the environment echoing the quiet mastery and thoughtfulness she brought to the space. Her fingers lingered briefly on the edge of the table, a tactile reminder of the control and intention behind every gesture, reinforcing the narrative she had quietly established. The gentle hum of the city below and the soft flicker of candlelight combined with the ambient sounds of the fireplace to create a multi-layered sensory backdrop that mirrored her calm, steady authority, a presence that neither demanded attention nor sought approval but simply existed as a statement of deliberate, thoughtful mastery. Aisha allowed a soft, satisfied exhale, acknowledging the completion of this carefully orchestrated encounter, the subtle but unmistakable shift in energy and perspective that she had guided to its quiet conclusion. Dominic remained still, absorbing the full measure of her strategic poise, the deliberate care in every movement, and the undeniable assertion of control she had demonstrated. The room itself now a reflection of her reclaimed presence, the balance of authority firmly established, and the narrative fully her own. The snow continued to drift past the windows, each flake a quiet witness to her composed resilience, deliberate mastery, and the graceful yet undeniable assertion that the evening, the space, and the subtle power between them had been entirely transformed by her steady, unshakable presence. The soft glow of the chandeliers and the golden flicker from the fireplace bathed the penthouse in a serene warmth, highlighting the polished hardwood floors and the shimmering ornaments on the Christmas tree as Aisha Bennett stood near the center of the room, her posture composed, shoulders squared, and head held high with quiet authority. She allowed her amber eyes to sweep over the carefully curated space one final time, noting how every element, from the arrangement of the silver-wrapped box to the placement of the cards and photographs, told a story of deliberate preparation, reflection, and the quiet mastery she had cultivated over the months. The snow outside continued to fall gently, the city lights catching each flake as they drifted past the towering windows, creating a serene backdrop that mirrored the calm and poise she projected within. Aisha stepped toward the table and lightly touched the silver box, its contents, a collection of meaningful tokens, handwritten notes, and carefully selected photographs, reflecting the journey she had undertaken from resilience through deliberate transformation to empowerment. Each gesture she made was precise, deliberate, and imbued with intention, reinforcing the narrative she had silently orchestrated, leaving Dominic Thorne to absorb the subtle but undeniable shift in balance and presence within the room. The ambient scent of pine, vanilla, and subtle holiday spices mingled with the warmth of the fireplace, creating an environment of composed intensity that highlighted the quiet authority she now held. Dominic observed her movements carefully, his posture upright yet relaxed, eyes reflecting a dawning awareness of the deliberate orchestration and calm mastery she had brought to every detail of the evening, a recognition that the power dynamic had shifted entirely under her poised command. Aisha allowed a slow, controlled exhale, letting the rhythm of her breathing underscore the deliberate cadence of her movements and the quiet power radiating from her presence. She stepped back slightly, allowing the ambient light from the fireplace and chandeliers to frame her silhouette. The reflections on the polished surfaces and the subtle glint of ornaments reinforcing her composed authority and the thoughtful planning that had guided the entire sequence. The snowflakes continued to drift past the windows, silent witnesses to the careful choreography of the evening, each one highlighting the calm deliberation with which she had reclaimed both space and narrative. Aisha's hands rested lightly at her sides, her posture a blend of strength, poise, and unyielding confidence, each movement a testament to the quiet mastery she had cultivated and the measured authority she now exerted. Dominic's expression softened, a subtle acknowledgement of the grace, resilience, and strategic presence she projected. The room itself transformed into a reflection of her deliberate control, composure, and thoughtful influence. The warm glow of the fireplace and the soft twinkle of the Christmas lights framed the final tableau, a cinematic harmony of light, shadow, and presence, emphasizing the careful, precise orchestration of the moment and the unshakable authority Aisha had established. She allowed herself a quiet, satisfied breath, absorbing the resonance of the evening, the balance of energy firmly in her favor, and the serene affirmation that the space, the narrative, and the unfolding dynamics had been guided entirely by her calm, deliberate mastery, leaving Dominic to witness and reflect on the quiet but undeniable shift that had defined the transformation, marking the end of the evening with poised resolution, empowerment, and the subtle promise of a future shaped by her deliberate and unwavering presence.